increasingly we live in an information economy, and increasingly our leisure time activities are also organized around the consumption and the production of information. What makes all of those information activities, professional and personal, possible is our ability to make limited but significant use of pre-existing copyrighted materials in our own information activities. And that ability is protected in our law by the copyright doctrine of fair use. Journalism is and always has been a profession devoted to quoting, reproducing, and interpreting the social environment. The problem these days, of course, is that larger and larger parts of that social environment are subject to copyright law. So without fair use, which permits legitimate users to quote and excerpt copyrighted material without getting permission, the practice of journalism would be becoming more and more difficult every day.
Probably the biggest news in our report on the problems that journalists face in relationship to copyright was that they are actually self-censoring.
They are often paralyzed by fear of breaking the law, or paralyzed by fear of getting in trouble with their company.
Journalists were deciding to delay to publish their work. They were deciding even to not undertake innovative new projects because they just weren't sure about the law.
Well, fair use is an important part of almost everything that I do. My job is to find video of breaking news moments and incorporate that video into stories.
I don't know how you could do journalism today and not use fair use.
I think that fair use is absolutely imperative for journalistic innovation.
As somebody who is a cultural critic, is a television critic, is a media critic, I'm always going to established works and commenting on them or using them to illustrate some trend in society.
For example, with some of the media critique work that I do, I think that it's really important to be able to call out those examples and to quote them at length.
The set of principles in fair use for journalism expresses the consensus of a professional community. Judges take that kind of consensus document very seriously because it helps them understand what the needs of a community are in order to exercise its generation of new culture. So this is a very powerful document in a legal environment, in part because it is a non-legal document and it comes out of the professional practices of a community. The set of principles in fair use for journalism is a document that journalists created to help each other understand what the consensus of their field is around how to apply fair use in their work.
The consensus reached while developing this set of principles for fair use in journalism is expressed in the document in the form of 7 principles, each related to a recurrent situation that journalists face, what to do about incidentally captured copyrighted material that may be in the background, for example, of a photograph or video, or what to do about using copyrighted evidence to illustrate or to confirm a news point, or how to deal with historical material in reporting stories that have in fact a historical dimension, and more. At the same time, a reader of the document will discover that integrated with and essentially interdependent with those principles are a variety of limitations, because the journalists believed that although fair use was an extremely important tool for them, it wasn't a blank check.
one of the major issues here is that journalists just simply don't know the law. And so having these principles laid out with clear situational contexts is incredibly helpful and definitely inspiring to young journalists.
At my newspaper, we have a lot of people who are blogging, and we're all making these decisions in real time, mostly by ourselves. So I think a document like this would help us in that sense.
I hope that a document like this can be something that editors can stick up for their reporters or writers and report to council, hey, we have this within our rights. Go back and tell the rights holder that we can use this.
It's more of a document that gives journalists permission to do their job better instead of limiting them and the scope of the reporting that they currently do.
Well, so clarity always makes you more confident. If you understand where the stepping stones are, then you don't have to spend so much time and energy trying to figure out a workaround. So yeah, I think these will make me much bolder as a journalist, and I hope they'll do the same for others.